Sometimes the worst night of your life is the one that changes everything forever. Rain hammered against the glass walls of Night Global's downtown Chicago headquarters while Emily Carter sat alone on the 32nd floor, staring at the termination letter trembling in her hands. At 24 years old, she had exactly $43 left in her checking account, 3 overdue hospital bills for her mother's treatment, and now no job. The cleaning crew had already gone home. Most of the lights inside the building were off, leaving only the reflection of lightning flashing across the dark windows behind her. Emily swallowed hard and wiped her cheeks before anyone could see her crying, even though there was no one left to see it. Her manager's words still echoed inside her head. Someone has to take responsibility. She knew she had been framed. The missing financial files, the corrupted accounts, the accusations during the emergency meeting earlier that evening. None of it made sense. But nobody listened to the quiet assistant from the south side of Chicago. Nobody ever did. Thunder shook the building as Emily slowly stood, slipping her worn coat over her shoulders. The fabric was still damp from the freezing rain outside. Her phone battery blinked at 2%. She reached for her bag, when suddenly every light on the floor shut off at once. Darkness swallowed the office. Emily froze. For a second, the only sound was the storm roaring beyond the windows. Then came the low hum of emergency backup lights flickering alive down the hallway. Her pulse quickened. "Hello?" she called softly, her voice almost disappearing beneath the thunder. No answer. She took a cautious step forward across the marble floor, heels clicking through the empty corridor. The building suddenly felt too large, too silent. Then she heard footsteps, slow, controlled, coming toward her from the darkness. Emily's breath caught in her throat as a tall figure emerged beneath the dim emergency lights. A man in a black wool coat, rainwater dripping from his dark hair onto the floor. He looked like he had stepped out of a magazine cover, except there was something cold in his eyes that made her instantly nervous. "Why are you still here?" his deep voice asked calmly. Emily tightened her grip on her bag. "I work here," she answered quietly. "At least, I used to." The man studied her face for a moment, noticing the tears she was trying to hide. Outside, lightning illuminated the skyline behind him. "Everyone else evacuated 20 minutes ago," he said. "There was a security alert." Emily frowned. "Nobody told me." Before the man could answer, a deafening explosion suddenly erupted from outside the building. The entire floor shook violently. Emily screamed as the windows rattled. Somewhere below, car alarms began blaring across the parking structure. Without hesitation, the stranger lunged forward and pulled Emily down behind a concrete support wall just as another violent boom echoed through the garage beneath them. Her heart slammed against her chest. Dust drifted from the ceiling. "Stay down," the man ordered sharply, shielding her with his body. Emily's hands shook uncontrollably. "What's happening?" she whispered. The stranger glanced toward the shattered glass overlooking the parking structure. Flames reflected in his eyes. For the first time, Emily noticed the tension in his jaw, the calculation, the danger. Then voices exploded through the stairwell nearby. Men shouting, running footsteps. Sir, where are you?" Emily looked up in confusion as 3 men in dark suits rushed onto the floor. One of them stopped cold the second he saw the stranger. "Mr. Knight," he breathed urgently. "Your vehicle was targeted. We need to move immediately." Emily felt the blood drain from her face. "Mr. Knight?" Her eyes slowly lifted back toward the man standing inches away from her. Adrian Knight, the billionaire CEO whose face appeared on magazine covers, business channels, and billboards across America. The owner of the very company that had just destroyed her life. And somehow, on the worst night she had ever lived through, he had just saved hers. Emily could barely breathe as the cold red emergency lights flashed across Adrian Knight's face. For a moment, the entire world felt unreal. The billionaire standing in front of her was no longer just a stranger in a dark hallway. He was the man whose name was printed across skyscrapers, financial magazines, and television screens all over America. Yet somehow, his attention was fixed completely on her. "We need to leave now," one of the security men said urgently while speaking into an earpiece. Rainwater dripped from the ends of his suit jacket as he scanned the damaged floor around them. Adrian did not move immediately. His sharp gray eyes stayed on Emily, noticing how pale she had become. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. Emily blinked in disbelief. I am okay. Another loud siren echoed from below the building. Somewhere outside, people were shouting in panic as flashing police lights reflected against the rain-covered windows. Adrian stepped closer and gently steadied Emily when she nearly lost her balance. Only then did she notice the dark stain spreading across the side of his white dress shirt beneath the open coat. "You are bleeding," she whispered. Adrian glanced down briefly like it barely mattered. "It is nothing." "That is not nothing." Emily's voice came out sharper than she intended. One of the security guards interrupted immediately. "Sir, we cannot stay exposed." Adrian finally nodded once. "Get the car through the lower tunnel." The men moved quickly. Emily stood frozen while the billionaire turned back toward her again. "You cannot stay here tonight," he said calmly. "The police are locking the building down." Emily looked away in embarrassment. She hated how close she was to crying again. "I will figure something out." Adrian studied her face carefully, almost like he could see through every lie she was trying to tell herself. "You do not have anywhere to go." It was not a question. Emily swallowed hard, but said nothing. Outside, thunder rolled across the Chicago skyline while cold rain streaked down the shattered windows behind them. Adrian slowly removed his black wool coat and placed it around her shoulders before she could protest. The warmth caught her completely off guard. The coat smelled faintly like cedarwood and rain. Expensive, but comforting. "Come with me," he said. Emily hesitated. Every survival instinct told her this. Situation was insane. Billionaires did not rescue fired employees in the middle of the night. Men like Adrian Knight existed in a different universe from people like her. But when another burst of alarms echoed through the building, she realized she had nowhere else to go. Minutes later, they moved quickly through a private underground corridor beneath the tower. The tunnel was dimly lit, silent except for the sound of rainwater dripping through distant pipes. Emily walked beside Adrian while two security guards stayed ahead of them. "Why would somebody target your car?" she asked softly. Adrian kept his eyes forward. "When people lose billions of dollars, they make reckless decisions." Emily stared at him. The way he said it sounded terrifyingly normal, as if danger was simply part of his everyday life. They finally reached a black SUV waiting behind a steel security gate. The second Adrian stepped inside, the guard sealed the doors, and the vehicle pulled away smoothly into the storm. Chicago rushed past outside the tinted windows in blurs of gold and rain. Emily sat stiffly beside him, clutching his coat tighter around herself. Her wet hair clung to her cheeks, and exhaustion was beginning to hit her all at once. Adrian loosened his tie slightly before leaning his head back against the seat. For the first time since she met him, he looked tired. "Human, you should go to a hospital," Emily said quietly while glancing again at the blood on his shirt. Adrian gave a faint smile without opening his eyes. "I have had worse nights." Emily looked down at her trembling hands. "I have not." Silence filled the SUV for several seconds until Adrian suddenly spoke again. "You said they fired you tonight." Emily nodded slowly. "They blamed me for corrupted financial records." Adrian opened his eyes then. Sharp. Focused. "Did you do it?" "No." Her answer came instantly. Adrian held her gaze for a long moment, studying her expression carefully in the dim light. Then he nodded once like he believed her completely. Nobody had done that all night. Not her manager. Not human resources. Not a single person in that building. Somehow the first person to believe her was the billionaire sitting beside her while blood soaked through his shirt during a thunderstorm at midnight. The city looked completely different from 30 floors above the river. Emily stood silently beside the massive glass windows while rain slid down the skyline of downtown Chicago like silver lines painted across the night. She had never been inside a place like this before. Adrian Knight's penthouse felt less like an apartment and more like a private world hidden above the city. Soft lights reflected off dark marble floors. A fireplace glowed quietly across the enormous living room. Everything looked expensive, untouched, almost too perfect to belong to real life. Emily tightened Adrian's coat around herself as one of the security men handed Adrian a phone. "The police sealed the garage, sir," he said carefully. "News outlets are already calling it an electrical fire." Adrian's expression darkened slightly. "And the board? 2 members are requesting an emergency meeting tomorrow morning." Adrian gave a cold smile that did not reach his eyes. "Of course they are." Emily pretended not to listen, but the tension in the room was impossible to ignore. The security team moved with nervous precision around him, treating every word he said like an order that could change the direction of entire companies. Yet Adrian himself remained strangely calm, controlled, like a man used to carrying pressure heavier than most people could survive. One of the guards finally stepped closer again. "Sir, the doctor is on his way." Adrian shook his head immediately. "No doctors tonight." "Sir, you are injured." I said no. The room fell silent. The guard nodded reluctantly before leaving with the others, and within seconds the penthouse became quiet except for the storm outside. Emily looked toward Adrian carefully. He loosened the cuff of his shirt with one hand, but the movement was slower now. Exhaustion was beginning to show beneath his calm expression. "You should sit down," Emily said softly. Adrian looked at her for a second, almost surprised she was still there. Then he gave a small nod and lowered himself onto the edge of the couch near the fireplace. Emily hesitated. Before walking toward the bathroom, she had noticed near the hallway. A few minutes later, she returned holding a clean towel and a small first aid kit she found beneath the sink. Adrian looked up as she approached. "What are you doing? If you refuse to see a doctor, somebody still needs to clean that wound." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth for the first time that night. "You always this stubborn?" Emily sat carefully across from him. "Only when someone is bleeding on a $2,000 couch." Adrian actually let out a quiet laugh under his breath. The sound caught her off guard. Billionaires on television never laughed like normal people. They always looked polished and distant. But sitting there beside the fire with rain hammering the windows behind him, Adrian suddenly seemed less like a famous businessman and more like an exhausted man trying not to fall apart. Emily gently rolled up the sleeve of his shirt and paused when she saw the scrape along his side. "This is going to sting. I will survive." She cleaned the cut carefully while Adrian stayed completely still. His jaw tightened slightly when the cold cloth touched the injury, but he never complained. Emily focused on her hands, trying not to notice how close they suddenly were. The expensive watch on his wrist, the scent of cedarwood lingering from his coat around her shoulders. The way his voice softened whenever he spoke directly to her. "Why did you believe me?" she asked quietly after several seconds. Adrian looked toward the fire. "About what?" "About being innocent." He was silent for a moment before answering. "Because people who are guilty usually talk too much." Emily stared at him. "That is your billionaire wisdom?" "Part of it." Another small smile appeared between them before fading again. Outside, lightning flashed across the windows, briefly illuminating the room in white light. Adrian's phone vibrated on the table beside him. He glanced at the screen, and instantly the warmth disappeared from his expression. Emily noticed it immediately. "What is wrong?" Adrian slowly locked the phone without answering. "Nothing you need to worry about." But Emily could feel the shift. In the room, the danger from earlier had followed them there. Then Adrian suddenly stood and walked toward the giant windows overlooking the city below. His reflection stared back at him through the rain-covered glass. "Tonight was not random," he said quietly. Emily's stomach tightened. "You mean the explosion?" Adrian nodded once. "Somebody wanted to send me a message." Emily looked down at the blood-stained cloth still in her hands. For the first time, she realized something terrifying. The moment Adrian Knight saved her life in that building, her world had become connected to his. And deep down, she had the strange feeling there was no going back. The people smiling beside you in daylight are sometimes the same people trying to destroy you in the dark. Emily could not sleep. Nearly 2 a.m, she stood alone in the enormous kitchen of Adrian Knight's penthouse, staring out at the rain-soaked Chicago streets nearly 40 floors below. The storm had weakened, but lightning still flickered beyond the skyline every few minutes, turning the clouds silver. She wrapped both hands around the warm mug of tea she found sitting beside the espresso machine, though she had no memory of making it. Her mind was still trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. Fired. Trapped in the building. The explosion. Adrian Knight. Nothing felt real anymore. Behind her, she heard soft footsteps crossing the marble floor. "You should be asleep." Adrian's deep voice filled the quiet room. Emily turned and found him standing near the doorway, wearing a dark gray sweater instead of the ruined white shirt from earlier. Somehow he looked even more dangerous dressed casually, like someone powerful enough to not need to prove it. His hair was still slightly damp from the shower, and the exhaustion beneath his eyes had become more visible in the softer light. Emily looked down at the mug in her hands. I could say the same thing to you. Adrian walked toward the windows slowly. I stopped sleeping well a long time ago. Emily studied him carefully. Billionaires were supposed to have perfect lives, perfect homes, perfect futures. But there was something lonely about him standing there in silence while the city glowed beneath the storm. Does this happen often? She asked quietly. Adrian glanced toward her. Attempted attacks? Emily nodded hesitantly. Adrian gave a faint, humorless smile. More often than you would think. Emily stared at him in disbelief. How can you say that so calmly? Because panic does not solve anything. He leaned one hand against the counter beside her. Fear only matters if you let it control you. Emily lowered her eyes toward the steam rising from the mug. Easy for someone like you to say. Adrian's expression shifted slightly. Someone like me? She immediately regretted saying it out loud. I just mean, you have power, money, security, people protecting you. Adrian looked toward the rain outside again before answering. Money changes your surroundings. It does not guarantee peace. His voice was quieter now, honest. Before Emily could respond, Adrian's phone suddenly vibrated across the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with an incoming call. Emily noticed his expression harden the instant he saw the caller's name. Adrian answered immediately. What happened? Silence filled the room except for the distant voice speaking through the phone. Emily watched Adrian's jaw tighten slowly. Who accessed the files? Another pause. Adrian's eyes darkened. Do not move anything until I arrive tomorrow. He ended the call sharply and stared down at the screen for several seconds without speaking. What is it? Emily asked carefully. Adrian looked at her directly. The financial records you were accused of corrupting tonight. Emily's heartbeat quickened. What about them? Someone deleted another section of data 30 minutes ago. Emily felt cold all over. But I was not even there. Adrian nodded slowly. I know. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Which means whoever framed you is trying to erase something before morning. Emily gripped the edge of the counter. Why would they blame me? Adrian studied her face carefully before answering. Because assistants are invisible to most executives. Easy targets. Easy sacrifices. The truth in his words hurt more than she expected. Because deep down she knew he was right. Nobody in that boardroom had even looked at her while accusing her. She had simply been the easiest person to destroy. Adrian suddenly walked toward the living room table and opened a secure tablet waiting there. Emily watched him pull up a series of financial reports filled with numbers and highlighted transactions. These accounts moved nearly $80 million through shell companies over 6 months, Adrian said quietly. Emily frowned. That is impossible. Exactly. Adrian tapped the screen again. Somebody inside Night Global has been stealing from the company. Emily's stomach tightened as realization hit her. And they needed someone to blame before you found out. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. You were never the problem, Emily. Hearing her name in his voice sent something strange through her chest. Gentle, protective, dangerous in an entirely different way. Then Adrian's tablet suddenly displayed a security alert across the screen. Both of them froze. Access breach detected. Unknown login attempt. Adrian's expression instantly changed. Cold. Focused. His eyes lifted slowly toward Emily. Someone knows the record survived. Emily's pulse began racing again. What does that mean? Adrian locked the tablet immediately and walked toward her. It means tonight was never just about me. By 3 a.m, the storm outside had finally softened into steady rain, but the tension inside Adrian Knight's penthouse only seemed to grow heavier. Emily sat quietly at the far end of the living room couch, while Adrian worked across from her at the long black marble table near the windows. Multiple financial reports glowed across the screens in front of him, reflecting cold blue light against his face. He had barely spoken for almost an hour. Every few minutes his phone vibrated with new messages from executives, lawyers, or security teams, but Adrian ignored most of them. Emily watched him carefully without meaning to. There was something strangely isolating about seeing one of the most powerful men in America sitting completely alone in the middle of the night while an entire city slept beneath him. Despite the luxury surrounding him, he looked exhausted in a way money could never fix. Emily lowered her eyes toward her own phone resting beside her. The battery had finally charged enough to turn back on. Dozens of missed calls and messages filled the screen immediately. Her landlord, collection agencies, 2 texts from the hospital. Her stomach tightened the second she opened the latest voicemail notification. Miss Carter, this is St. Matthew Medical Center regarding your mother's outstanding balance. Please contact billing services immediately to avoid interruption of treatment scheduling. Emily closed her eyes briefly. The shame hit harder every single time. She quickly locked the phone again before Adrian could notice. But his voice interrupted the silence almost instantly. Your mother is sick? Emily looked up in surprise. Adrian was still focused on the reports in front of him, yet somehow he noticed everything. She hesitated before answering quietly. Kidney disease. Adrian finally looked toward her fully. How long? Almost 2 years. Emily tried to smile faintly, but it disappeared fast. The treatments are expensive. Adrian's eyes moved briefly toward the hospital notification still glowing faintly across her dark phone screen. That is why you stayed late tonight. Emily nodded slowly. I needed the overtime hours. The room fell silent again except for the rain tapping gently against the massive windows. Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her with an expression Emily could not fully read anymore. It was not pity. Somehow that made it worse. You should not have been carrying that alone, he said quietly. Emily let out a small laugh, filled with exhaustion. Most people do. Adrian stared at her for several seconds before asking something unexpected. Why did you not ask for help? Emily looked down at her hands. Because people stop listening when they hear words like debt and illness. Her voice softened. After a while, you learn to survive quietly. Something changed in Adrian's expression then. A heaviness. Almost guilt. Before Emily could understand it, his phone suddenly rang again across the table. This time he answered immediately. Talk to me. Emily watched his face sharpen as the caller spoke. Silence. Adrian stood slowly from his chair. Pull every security camera from the accounting department tonight. I want names before sunrise. Another pause. And freeze every executive access code tied to offshore transfers. He ended the call and walked toward the windows, his reflection stretching across the dark glass overlooking Chicago. The deleted files originated from inside the executive network, he said quietly. Emily's heart dropped. So someone high up is involved. Adrian nodded once. Very high up. Emily stood carefully. Then why would they target me? I am nobody. Adrian turned toward her immediately. Do not say that. His voice was calm, but firm enough to stop her completely. People only call someone insignificant when they think that person will not fight back. Emily stared at him silently. Adrian stepped closer, lowering his voice. But whoever did this made one mistake. What mistake? Adrian's gray eyes locked onto hers. They underestimated you. Emily felt her chest tighten unexpectedly. Nobody had ever looked at her the way Adrian did in that moment. Not because of how she looked. Not because he wanted something from her. He looked at her like she mattered. Like she was stronger than she believed. Suddenly, the penthouse elevator chimed softly across the room. Both of them looked up instantly. Adrian's expression darkened again. He moved in front of Emily almost instinctively as the elevator doors slowly opened at the far end of the living room. A tall older man in an expensive navy coat stepped out, carrying a tablet beneath one arm. His silver hair was damp from the rain outside. You should not have come here tonight, Adrian said coldly. The man glanced toward Emily briefly before answering. I did not have a choice. He handed Adrian the tablet carefully. You need to see this immediately. Adrian looked down at the screen, and for the first time since Emily met him, genuine shock crossed his face. Emily's pulse quickened. What is it? Adrian slowly lifted his eyes toward her. Your employee access badge was used again 20 minutes ago. Emily went completely still. That is impossible. Adrian's voice turned dangerously quiet. Someone is still pretending to be you. The most dangerous lies are the ones told using someone else's name. Emily felt her heartbeat pounding inside her chest as Adrian stared down at the security report glowing on the tablet screen. The older man beside him adjusted his glasses nervously while rain continued tapping against the massive windows behind them. The access badge entered the executive archive room at 2:37 in the morning. He explained carefully. The system confirmed Miss Carter's credentials. Emily shook her head immediately. That is impossible. My badge was in my purse the entire night. Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. Then somebody cloned your credentials. Emily looked between them in confusion. Why would they go through all this just to frame me? The older man answered quietly before Adrian could. Because whoever is stealing from Night Global needs someone believable to take the fall. Emily wrapped her arms tightly around herself as cold fear crept through her stomach. She had spent years trying to stay invisible at work. Quiet employees survive longer. That was what she always believed. But now her name was somehow tied to financial crimes, deleted records, and an attack connected to one of the most powerful men in America. None of it made sense anymore. Adrian handed the tablet back to the older man. Lock every archive room immediately. No executive accesses financial servers without my direct approval. Understood. The man hesitated briefly before lowering his voice. And the board meeting tomorrow morning? Adrian's expression hardened instantly. It stays on schedule. After the man left, silence settled heavily across the penthouse again. Emily looked toward Adrian carefully. You think somebody at your company tried to hurt you because you found the missing money? Adrian walked slowly toward the fireplace, loosening the sleeves of his sweater as exhaustion settled into his face again. I think somebody became desperate. Emily stared at the city lights beyond the windows. This is insane. Adrian gave a faint, humorless smile. Welcome to corporate America. Emily should have laughed, but she was too overwhelmed to react. Her entire life had changed in a matter of hours. Earlier that evening, she had been worrying about unpaid hospital bills and whether she could afford groceries next week. Now she was standing inside a billionaire's penthouse while discussing corporate theft and security breaches at nearly 4 in the morning. Adrian suddenly noticed her shivering slightly beneath his coat. Without a word, he walked toward a cabinet near the kitchen and returned with a folded blanket. Emily looked surprised when he placed it gently beside her on the couch. You need rest. I do not think sleep is possible anymore. Adrian sat down across from her again, quieter this time. You would be surprised what people can survive when they are exhausted enough. Emily studied him carefully. There was something about the way he spoke that sounded personal, like he understood exhaustion too well. When was the last time you slept normally? She asked softly. Adrian leaned back slightly, his gray eyes drifting toward the rain outside. Before my father died. Emily blinked. She recognized the name Night everywhere in Chicago, but she suddenly realized she knew almost nothing about the man sitting in front of her. Adrian continued quietly, almost distracted by the storm outside. After he passed away, everyone expected me to become him overnight. The company, investors, board members, thousands of employees. A faint smile crossed his face without warmth. Nobody asked whether I was ready. Emily looked at him differently then. Not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, just a man who had spent years carrying impossible expectations alone. How old were you? She asked. 28. Emily lowered her voice. That is too young. Adrian looked back toward her slowly. So is 24. The words caught her off guard. Before she could answer, her phone suddenly vibrated loudly against the couch cushion beside her. Emily grabbed it quickly, expecting another hospital notice, but the second she read the screen, her stomach dropped. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Hello. At first, there was only silence. Then a distorted voice spoke quietly through the line. You should stop asking questions about Night Global. Emily froze completely. Adrian noticed her expression instantly and stood up. The voice continued calmly. People who dig too deep disappear quietly in this city. The line disconnected. Emily stared at the phone in shock while her hands trembled uncontrollably. Adrian crossed the room immediately. Who was that? Emily swallowed hard. They knew my name. Adrian took the phone gently from her hand and checked the number, but it already showed unavailable. The room suddenly felt colder than before. More dangerous. Adrian looked toward the dark skyline beyond the windows, his expression unreadable now. Then he turned back toward Emily with a calmness that somehow made everything even more frightening. From this moment forward, he said quietly, you do not go anywhere alone. Fear changes people, but power reveals who they really are. Dawn slowly crept across the Chicago skyline, turning the storm clouds pale gray beyond the massive windows of Adrian Knight's penthouse. Emily had not slept for even a minute. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the distorted voice from the phone call again. You should stop asking questions about Night Global. The words replayed endlessly inside her mind. She stood quietly near the kitchen island wearing Adrian's oversized black coat while the city below slowly came back to life. Traffic lights reflected against rain-covered streets. Early commuters filled the sidewalks, carrying umbrellas beneath the cold morning sky. Everything outside looked normal, but Emily felt like her entire world had shifted overnight into something dangerous and impossible to escape. Across the living room, Adrian was already dressed in a dark navy suit, reviewing documents on a tablet while speaking quietly with his security director near the windows. Even after everything that happened, he still looked composed, controlled. But Emily was beginning to notice the small signs he tried to hide. The slight tension in his jaw, the exhaustion behind his eyes, the way his fingers paused for half a second whenever new security updates arrived. The board members are all confirmed for 8:30, the security director said carefully. Media coverage around the explosion is increasing. Adrian signed one document without looking up. Keep reporters away from the building until after the meeting. And Miss Carter? Adrian finally lifted his eyes toward Emily. Silence filled the room briefly before he answered. She stays with me. Emily's breath caught slightly at the certainty in his voice. The security director nodded immediately and left the penthouse without another word. Adrian walked toward the kitchen afterward, loosening the cuff of his suit jacket. You should eat something before we leave. Emily shook her head. I am not going to your board meeting. Adrian poured coffee into 2 cups calmly. You are. Adrian, I do not even belong in the same room as those people. He handed her one of the cups carefully. Neither do thieves. Emily looked down at the coffee, warming her hands. What if they blame me again? Adrian's voice lowered slightly. Then they answer to me directly. The words should not have affected her the way they did, but they settled somewhere deep inside her chest. Nobody had protected her before. Nobody powerful had ever stood beside her instead of above her. Adrian glanced toward her phone resting near the counter. Did the hospital call again? Emily hesitated before nodding slowly. Adrian remained silent for a moment before asking quietly, How much do you owe? Emily looked away immediately. Too much. Emily. His voice softened slightly. How much? She swallowed hard. Almost $180,000. Adrian did not react with shock the way most people did. He simply nodded once, like he understood exactly how crushing numbers could become when attached to someone you loved. Your mother should not suffer because insurance companies profit from illness, he said quietly. Emily stared at him in surprise. You sound like someone who hates being rich. A faint smile touched his face briefly. I hate watching money decide who deserves peace. Before Emily could respond, the television mounted across the living room suddenly switched on automatically with a breaking news alert. Both of them looked up instantly. A female news anchor appeared on screen beside a massive photo of Adrian taken outside the New York Stock Exchange. Breaking overnight developments involving Billionaire CEO Adrian Knight, the anchor announced. Sources close to Knight Global report possible internal corruption tied to last night's explosion at the company headquarters in Chicago. Emily's stomach tightened immediately as another image suddenly appeared beside Adrian's photograph. Her employee ID picture. An unidentified employee connected to the investigation is believed to be missing after security breaches involving financial records worth nearly $80 million. Emily went completely pale. Oh my God. Adrian grabbed the remote instantly and muted the television, but the damage was already done. Her face was now connected publicly to the scandal, to the attack, to him. Emily stepped backward slowly, panic rising fast in her chest. Everyone is going to think I did this. Adrian crossed the room immediately. Listen to me carefully. His voice stayed calm despite the tension building around them. Whoever leaked your name to the press is trying to pressure you into disappearing. Emily shook her head. I cannot do this. Yes, you can. Adrian's gray eyes locked onto hers with complete certainty. Because innocent people do not run. Emily looked at him helplessly. You do not understand what it is like being powerless. Adrian's expression changed then. Colder. More honest than before. Emily, he said quietly. I grew up watching powerful people destroy anyone who threatened them. He stepped closer. The difference is that now I know exactly how they operate. The penthouse elevator suddenly chimed again across the room. Adrian turned instantly toward the sound as the doors slowly opened. One of his security guards stepped out, holding a sealed envelope. Sir, the guard said carefully. This was delivered downstairs 10 minutes ago. Adrian took the envelope and opened it immediately. Emily watched the color slowly drain from his face as he read the single sheet of paper inside. "What is it?" she whispered. Adrian looked up at her with an expression she had never seen before. Real fear. Then he handed her the letter silently. Across the center of the page, written in black ink, were only 6 words. She saw too much that night. Sometimes the truth only comes out when powerful people realize they are losing control. Emily could still feel her hands trembling as she stared at the threatening message in front of her. She saw too much that night. The black ink looked almost calm against the white paper, which somehow made it even more terrifying. Adrian took the letter back slowly, his expression unreadable now. The warmth that had existed between them earlier disappeared beneath something colder, sharper, protective. He turned toward his security guard immediately. "Nobody enters this floor without my authorization." "Yes, sir." "And trace every camera in the lobby from the last 30 minutes. The guard nodded quickly and disappeared back into the elevator. Emily wrapped her arms tightly around herself, trying to steady her breathing. "This is getting out of control." Adrian looked toward her. "No, this means we are getting close." Emily stared at him in disbelief. "Somebody threatened me, Adrian." His jaw tightened slightly when she said it out loud. And that was a mistake. Before Emily could answer, Adrian's phone vibrated again across the kitchen counter. He glanced at the screen before speaking quietly. "The board members are already gathering downstairs." Emily looked toward the windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Rain still covered the streets, but the storm had finally passed. Morning sunlight was beginning to break through the clouds, reflecting against the glass towers surrounding Knight Global headquarters. The city looked peaceful from this high above, but Emily felt like she was standing on the edge of something dangerous. Adrian walked toward her slowly. "You do not have to come with me." Emily looked surprised. "I thought you wanted me there." "I do." His voice softened slightly. "But only if you choose it." Emily lowered her eyes toward the floor for a moment. Every instinct told her to leave, to disappear before her. Life became even more connected to this scandal, this company, this man. But then she remembered the humiliation in that boardroom the night before. The accusations. The way nobody defended her. She slowly looked back up at Adrian. "If I run now, they win." A faint expression crossed Adrian's face. Pride. Exactly. 30 minutes later, the private elevator doors opened directly into the executive floor of Knight Global. Emily stepped out beside Adrian and immediately felt every eye in the hallway turn toward them. Executives in expensive suits stopped speaking the second they saw her. Assistants whispered quietly near the conference rooms. News alerts flashed across television screens mounted along the walls. Adrian walked forward calmly like none of it affected him, but Emily stayed close beside him beneath the weight of dozens of stares. The giant boardroom doors opened ahead. Inside, nearly 20 executives sat around a long black conference table overlooking the Chicago River. The atmosphere turned icy the second Adrian entered the room with Emily beside him. A middle-aged man near the center immediately stood. "Adrian, what exactly is she doing here?" Adrian did not even slow his pace. "Sitting in. She is under investigation." "No," Adrian answered coldly while taking his seat at the head of the table. "She was selected as a scapegoat." Silence filled the room instantly. Emily stood near the far end of the table, feeling her pulse race beneath every stare directed at her. One woman near the windows crossed her arms sharply. "This company suffered a targeted attack last night, and now confidential records are missing. Bringing her here is irresponsible." Adrian calmly opened a folder in front of him. "The only irresponsible thing happening in this room is $80 million disappearing through executive accounts." Several faces around the table changed instantly. Emily noticed it immediately. Fear. Adrian pressed a button on the table remote, and financial records appeared across the giant screen mounted behind him. Dates. Offshore accounts. Hidden transfers. The room became completely silent. These transactions were authorized internally over 6 months, Adrian said evenly. And somebody inside this company used Emily Carter's credentials to hide the activity. One executive leaned forward aggressively. "You are making serious accusations without proof." Adrian's gray eyes lifted slowly toward him. "Actually, I brought proof." He tapped the remote again. Security footage appeared on the screen. A blurred figure entering the executive archive room during the night. Then another angle appeared. Clearer this time. Emily watched several executives visibly tense as the camera zoomed toward the face of the person using her stolen credentials. The room erupted instantly into shocked voices and panic. Emily's breath caught in her throat when she recognized the man on the screen. Daniel Mercer, Chief Financial Officer of Knight Global. The same executive who accused her publicly the night before. Daniel suddenly stood from his chair, his face pale. This footage proves nothing. Adrian rose slowly from his seat. Calm, controlled, dangerous. No, he said quietly. But the federal investigators waiting downstairs probably will. The boardroom doors opened immediately behind them. 2 federal agents stepped inside. And for the first time since Emily met him, Adrian Knight looked completely untouchable. One night can destroy a life, but sometimes it can also give someone a reason to live again. The executive boardroom remained completely silent as federal agents escorted Daniel Mercer out through the heavy glass doors. Nobody moved. Nobody even looked at each other. The fear hanging over the room was almost visible now. Emily stood near the far end of the conference table, still trying to process everything that had just happened. Less than 12 hours earlier, she had been accused of destroying financial records inside this company. Now the real criminal had been exposed in front of everyone. Adrian remained standing at the head of the table, calm and unreadable while executives avoided meeting his eyes. One older board member finally cleared his throat nervously. Adrian, perhaps we should postpone public statements until legal finishes reviewing everything. Adrian slowly looked toward him. No, his voice stayed quiet, but the authority behind it filled the entire room instantly. This company publicly destroyed an innocent employee overnight. He glanced briefly toward Emily before continuing. That mistake gets corrected today. Emily felt her chest tighten unexpectedly. Another executive spoke carefully. Media attention is already intense. Associating the company too closely with Miss Carter may create additional complications. Adrian's expression turned colder. The only complication here is that nobody questioned why a junior employee became the perfect target. Silence followed immediately. Nobody challenged him again. 20 minutes later, cameras flashed nonstop outside Knight Global headquarters as reporters crowded the front entrance beneath the cloudy Chicago sky. News vans lined the streets. Employees gathered behind security barriers, whispering anxiously while financial analysts on television screens speculated about corruption inside one of America's most powerful companies. Emily stood just inside the lobby beside Adrian, staring at the chaos outside through the massive glass entrance doors. I cannot go out there, she whispered. Adrian looked toward her calmly. Yes, you can. Emily shook her head immediately. They're going to ask questions I cannot answer. Adrian stepped slightly closer. Then let me answer them. Before she could protest again, the lobby doors opened. The noise outside exploded instantly as reporters shouted Adrian's name from every direction. Camera flashes reflected across the wet pavement, while security teams cleared a path toward the podium waiting near the building entrance. Adrian walked forward without hesitation. Emily remained frozen for half a second before following beside him. The moment reporters noticed her standing next to Adrian Knight, the crowd erupted even louder. Miss Carter, did you participate in the financial breach? Were you involved in the attack last night? Mr. Knight, is your company collapsing? Adrian stopped at the podium while the city noise echoed around them. Rain still clung to the sidewalks from the storm the night before, and cold wind swept between the buildings downtown. Adrian waited calmly until the reporters finally quieted. Then he spoke. Last night, an innocent employee was publicly blamed for crimes she did not commit. His voice carried clearly across the crowd. This morning, evidence confirmed that senior executives within Knight Global manipulated internal systems and used Emily Carter's identity to conceal financial theft. Reporters immediately erupted with more questions, but Adrian continued speaking without breaking focus. Miss Carter remained honest under pressure that would have broken most people. She deserves the truth, not suspicion. Emily stared at him in shock. Nobody had ever defended her publicly before. Not like this. Adrian looked toward her briefly before continuing. Effective immediately, Emily Carter will join the Knight Foundation as Executive Director of Community Health Programs. The entire crowd fell silent for 1 second before chaos exploded again. Emily's eyes widened in disbelief as she turned toward him. What? Adrian looked at her calmly. Your mother should never have struggled for treatment because of financial systems designed to fail ordinary families. Emily could barely breathe. Adrian, you understand those people better than executives ever will. His voice softened slightly beneath the cameras and flashing lights. That makes you the right person for the job. Emotion hit her so suddenly she could not speak. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not pitted. Not dismissed. Seen. Hours later, after the reporters finally disappeared and the city quieted again beneath another light rainfall, Emily stood outside the night global parking structure alone with Adrian. The same place where everything changed less than 24 hours earlier. Rain tapped softly against the concrete around them, while distant traffic echoed through downtown Chicago. Adrian reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a folded cream-colored scarf. Emily immediately recognized it. The scarf she had used to stop the bleeding on his side during the explosion. Adrian held it carefully between his hands before looking at her. "You kept it?" she asked softly. Adrian gave a faint smile. "Some things are worth keeping." The rain fell gently around them while the city lights reflected across the wet pavement. Emily looked up at him slowly. "Why did you help me that night?" Adrian was quiet for a moment before answering honestly. "Because everyone else walked past you like you did not matter." His gray eyes held hers steadily. "I could not." Emily felt tears gather in her eyes before she looked away briefly, overwhelmed by everything that had happened between them in only one night. Adrian stepped slightly closer beneath the rain. "If I had just been a normal man that night," he asked quietly, "would you still have trusted me?" Emily looked back at him as thunder rolled softly somewhere far beyond the city skyline. Then, with rain falling around both of them exactly like the night they met, she finally smiled through her tears. "Yes," she whispered. "I think I would have."